Hi everyone, my name is Amy Sansone and I am an HR generalist at Morgan Management. Today I'm going to present to you the Workplace Injury Reporting, Record Keeping, and Investigation Training. On our agenda, we are going to go over two important aspects of work-related injuries, incidents, and accidents. To start, we're going to go over what you need to do to report the injury or illness that an employee may encounter. And then in addition to that, we are also going to go over your OSHA requirements when it comes to record keeping. The second part of the presentation, we're going to cover some accident investigation and prevention tips. There's a accident investigation form that is attached to this presentation. I'll go over how to fill that out, when to fill it out, and where to send it. And then last but not least, we're just going to cover some overview information on workers' comp, and just so you can kind of understand why this topic is important and what we can do as a team to control those workers' comp costs and liabilities. Attached to this presentation is the entire PowerPoint that I'll be going over, as well as the injury investigation form that I just mentioned. Also attached, you'll find the OSHA record-keeping forms that you'll need to have on file. We'll go over all of that. And then in addition to that is something called MedCore marketing materials. The first thing I'm going to talk about is MedCore. And part of those marketing materials you'll see include printable posters that you can hang up. There's wallet cards that you can print out and pass out. There's like a little information guide that's attached to the presentation. So please feel free to download and save those things. Make sure you post the marketing materials if you haven't already. I know some properties should have hard copies of these things, but some may not. So if you're one of those ones that don't have it, now is a good time to print those out and post them around the property so that your employees are aware of this procedure. So we're going to get right into it and start off with what MedCore is. MedCore is a workplace injury and illness triage system that employees can call anytime they are injured on the job. It is a free, toll-free 1-800 number. They are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when an employee calls this number, they're going to talk to a live registered nurse. So what is MedCore? As I just mentioned, it's a 24/7 triage nurse service for employees that are injured at work or become ill as a result of an event or exposure to something in the work environment. So I can't stress enough that this is specifically for work-related injuries or illnesses, and it's only for employees. So this is not for someone that eats bad sushi at lunchtime and becomes sick. That would not be a work-related illness. However, it would be for someone that maybe was fixing an air conditioner and the Freon, somehow they inhaled it and it burned their lungs. That would be a work-related illness. In addition, it is only for employees, so this is not for any of your third-party vendors. This is not for residents, specifically only for Morgan employees. So when an employee becomes injured at work, a decision always needs to be made right away. Do you think it's severe enough that they should go to the doctors or an emergency room, or is it something that maybe they could, treat right at the property, maybe with some ice, a Band-Aid, something like that. None of us are doctors or nurses, so what's really nice about this is you and the injured employee, all you have to do is pick up the phone, you call this number, and you're going to speak to a live registered nurse, and they're going to give the injured employee the best course of action. If you feel like the injury is life-threatening, you should just call 911 right away. A life-threatening injury would be something like excessive bleeding, like you feel like someone is life is in imminent danger because they're bleeding so heavily, a loss of consciousness, things like that. Use your best judgment. We all know what a true emergency looks like and is, and in those instances, if you feel like an ambulance is needed, you would want to call 911. So how does the MedCore process work? Well, first we have our injury or illness that occurs. So let's say somebody falls and slips and they think they may have possibly broken or severely twisted their ankle. So what they should be doing is coming to their supervisor and letting them know, hey, I just slipped and fell outside on the sidewalk. My ankle's pretty swollen already. What should we do? So you're going to take that employee into a private area, and you're both going to call MedCore together. The supervisor, provided that you're available, you're going to make the call. You're going to start the call. The RN is going to speak to you first. They're going to ask you some basic questions, like about where you're located, what time did the employee come into work that day, things like that. And then the RN would like to speak to the actual injured employee. There are translators on demand as needed. So if you have an employee that their second language is English, you can request a translator. So the RN is going to go through a series of questions with the injured employee, and then based on the answers to those questions, the nurse is either going to suggest that they self-treat, meaning they, might suggest maybe you should go elevate your foot for a few hours, put some ice on it, take some ibuprofen, and then call us back and see how you're doing. Or if they think, this sounds pretty bad, I think it might be broken, you can't put any weight on it, you can't bend it, you can't move it, then they're going to refer that injured employee to a nearby medical facility. There is a difference between going to the emergency room and going to an urgent care center. Part of the reason for using this program is to decrease the number of visits that employees are seeking at the emergency room. The emergency room is very timely, it's very costly, and oftentimes most of the injuries that we see that occur at work are better to be treated at urgent care. They get care quicker, and the cost is much less expensive. So based on, the questions and the answers, the referral is going to be given to the employee of where they should go. The nurse triage system uses a GPS system, so they're going to pull up, the closest urgent care centers, or, if necessary, they will send them to an emergency room. And then the best thing about this is they actually create the report for the injured employee, and they send it directly to Human Resources. So you do not have to fill out a 3-4 page injury report on the employee. That is all handled by MedCore. Also, what's nice is the calls are all recorded, so if we ever have any questions or don't quite understand what the report says, we can always request that the call is listened to again. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that the employee should first report the injury to you and then you call together. That's always preferred. However, if for some reason you're not available, we would like the injured employee to call MedCore right away on their own. For example, if you have someone, maybe a maintenance tech who's on call over the weekend and they're fixing a hot water tank, it's 12 o'clock at night, and they, severely pull a back muscle or something like that, they could call MedCore right away. They don't need to wait to get a hold of you the next day or on Monday. We'd like them to call immediately. So now I'm going to play a quick video that just sort of walks you through the MedCore process and also highlights some of the benefits to using MedCore.
What is telephonic injury triage? Let's say you have a box, a heavy one. Well, maybe a bit heavier. That's better. And let's also say that you have a good employee. His name is Bob. Now, Bob walks along and sees the heavy box.
What's this do?
And Bob decides he's going to tidy up a bit and put the box back on the shelf where it belongs.
Huh? Uh-oh.
But what happens if Bob hurts his back? Well, Bob has options. He could, of course, tough it out and go back to work.
It's not that bad.
But what if it gets worse?
Ow.
That's not good for Bob, and that's certainly not good for his company. Now we're talking lost time, lost wages, insurance claims, potential litigation, and that's not good for anyone.
That's not good.
Or he could go see what his supervisor has to say, who may or may not have had the same injury 16 years ago when he was a star football player for state college.
I hurt my back. Hurt your back, huh? I had that once.
But wait, what's the supervisor going to do? Is he medically trained to make a decision? Probably not. So he drops the workers' compensation ball
Maybe we should get this looked at.
and decides to drive Bob off-site to the emergency room to get immediate assistance. And we all know what happens when the ER gets involved. A bill is generated, a claim starts, workers' comp, case management, indemnity, and so on. And poor Bob, we didn't forget about him, is still waiting to be seen at the ER.
Carlo was just busy.
Don't worry, Bob. Someone will be with you shortly.
Just a couple minutes. I'm sure.
Now let's look at a different scenario. What if Bob's company had Medcore and their 24-hour telephonic injury triage service? And let's say Bob sees that same box again.
What's this doing here?
Sorry, Bob. This will be the last time.
Huh? Uh-oh.
And because Medcore trained Bob's company on what to do when an injury occurs, Bob goes immediately to his
I
supervisor.
hurt my back. Hurt your back, huh?
And the supervisor immediately calls Medcore. And within seconds,
This is Kathy, registered nurse. How may I help you?
the supervisor and Bob are put in touch over the phone with a registered nurse. And in the end, it turns out Bob's injury isn't all that bad.
Phew.
And he's able to self-treat his injury with the proper instructions that Medcore's registered nurse gave him. And then Bob thanks the nurse,
Thank you.
and the supervisor thanks the nurse,
Thank you.
and Bob is able to stay at work, all because Bob's company had Medcore's telephonic injury triage service. Now, sometimes workplace injuries are serious, and employees need off-site health care. So if Bob's injury were more severe,
Ow.
the nurse would have suggested to Bob that he see a medical provider. In those kinds of circumstances, the nurse will make a referral to the employer's preferred provider network. More still, when referrals are necessary, the nurse will refer to the appropriate level of care, so employees don't end up in the emergency room if they don't have to be there.
Okay, so going back to our presentation, just going to switch screens again. Bear with me. So benefits of Medcore, just to review, costly emergency room visits and unnecessary clinic visits are avoided, while needed medical treatments are obtained sooner because the nurse recommends the level of care that is most appropriate to meet the injured employee's needs. When off-site care is needed, Medcore makes appropriate referral recommendations to preferred providers and vendors. The results are reductions in claims, costs, and litigation. Telephone triage calls are recorded to ensure quality care and deter fraud. And best of all, the nurse generates a triage report and sends the first report of injury directly to HR. So why do we use this? Well, it is easy to use. You just simply take the employee into a private area, call the 1-800 number, or again, if the supervisor isn't available, the employee is certainly able to and should call on their own. I recommend that everybody just go ahead and program this number directly into their cell phones, especially your maintenance guys and gals. You're going to want to have them put the number right into their cell phone so that way, you know, in the unlikely event they are injured and it's late at night or on the weekend and nobody's available or around, they'll have this number, you know, quickly on hand and they can just make that call. It's professional service. They're able to speak directly right to a nurse right at the point of injury. They shouldn't be waiting for 2-3 days to see, you know, maybe their back will feel better. No, they should go ahead and make that call right when the injury happens. The call only takes about 10 to 15 minutes, so it doesn't take long at all. And it's quickly reported directly to HR. So what do you need to do? As I just mentioned, I would really highly recommend you put this number directly into your phone. We've all known what it's like to need to call somebody and you can't seem to find that piece of paper that you've written the phone number on, or you can't, you're not near an area where maybe the poster is hanging up at that moment. So if you have it in your cell phone, it's right there at your fingertips. When you are holding your staff meetings at your property, make sure they're all aware of where these materials are, where to find them in the event they need to find that number, and they also need to know that this is the procedure for work-related injuries or illnesses. Employees shouldn't be getting hurt at work and then just taken off and going to the urgent care center. They should be coming to you and letting you know, or they should be picking up the phone and calling MedCorps right away. This also isn't to report injuries after the fact someone has already sought treatment. I've seen that happen quite a few times. People will, think that they're hurt, they'll go to the doctors, and then they'll come back, tell their supervisor, and then they call MedCorps. Yes, that's okay, because then at least we get the report, but it also sort of defeats the purpose because they're seeking treatment without speaking to the nurse first. Okay, our next topic is OSHA record keeping. As I mentioned, the OSHA record keeping forms are attached to the presentation. You can also go online to the OSHA website, just simply Google OSHA record keeping forms, and you'll find all the packets there that you need. There's also some instructions that you can find on that website as well. So, OSHA. It's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Congress created OSHA to assure safe and healthful conditions for working men and women by setting and enforcing standards and providing training, outreach, education, and compliance assistance. So most of you are familiar with OSHA, and one of the aspects to OSHA that can oftentimes be forgotten about is the record keeping. And when I say record keeping, I'm talking about when an employee becomes ill or injured on the job. So this next presentation that I'm going to show you is going to highlight what types of injuries need to be recorded on the OSHA forms, on the OSHA logs, and when they should be recorded and how they should be recorded. Again, I just need to switch screens.
They say this is a new circuit.
So, the severity criteria for recording a work-related injury or illness is death, loss of consciousness, days away from work, restricted work activity, or a job transfer. Also medical treatment beyond first aid. What this means is if an employee is injured at work and the MedCorps nurse tells them that they should go to the doctors or they should go to the hospital or urgent care, that would be considered medical treatment beyond first aid and would be considered OSHA recordable. If the MedCorps nurse tells them that they should put a Band-Aid on and just watch for any swelling, and they never end up needing to go seek medical treatment outside of that self-care recommendation, then it would not be OSHA recordable. Restricted work activity or job transfer, that means that somebody was injured badly enough that they're now restricted from doing certain parts of their regular job. So as a maintenance employee, they might be restricted from lifting, anything heavier than 10 pounds for 2 weeks. That would be OSHA recordable. Days away from work, it's just like what it sounds. So if I get hurt at work and my doctor says you need to stay out of work for the next 2 weeks, rest your back, that would be considered days away from work. So now you're going to see some demos on how to actually fill out the OSHA log. The first one is going to be recording a case with days away from work.
OSHA Form 300, recording a case with days away from work. For cases that involve 1 or more days away from work, you must place a check mark in column H on the OSHA Form 300 and enter the number of calendar days the employee was away from work in column K. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. When counting days, be sure to count the days the employee would not have been able to work, regardless of whether he or she was scheduled to work. This would include weekends and holidays. Do not count the day of the injury. If the day count reaches 180 calendar days, you may stop counting subsequent days and enter 180 in column K.
The next demonstration will show you recording a case with restricted work activity or job transfer. So this is the employee that, has a lifting restriction or maybe a walking restriction.
OSHA Form 300, recording a case with restricted work activity or job transfer. For cases that involve restricted work activity or job transfer, you must place a check mark in column I on the OSHA Form 300 and enter the number of calendar days the employee was restricted in column L. You count the days in the same manner as counting days away from work. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. An employee is considered restricted if he or she is unable to work a full shift or is unable to perform all of the work activities he or she would be expected to do at least once during the week. If a case involves both days away from work and days of restricted work activity, place a check mark in column H, leave column I blank, and enter the correct day counts in both columns K and L. For example, if an employee had 3 days away from work and 2 of restricted work activity, place a check mark in column H and enter a 3 in column K and a 2 in column L. Again, note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness.
And finally, for the OSHA log, they're going to show you how to record a case with
OSHA
medical
Form
treatment.
300, recording a case with medical treatment beyond first aid. For cases that involve medical treatment beyond first aid, you must place a check mark on the OSHA Form 300 in column J, which is for other recordable cases. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. For OSHA record-keeping purposes, medical treatment is any treatment for an injury or illness except diagnostic procedures, observation and counseling, and first aid. First aid consists of 14 specific treatments listed in section 1904.7b5 of the regulatory text. It includes items such as non-prescription medication, wound coverings, and hot and cold treatment. You can access the complete list using the regulatory text link on this web page, or by looking in the overview section of the record-keeping forms package, also linked from the record-keeping page.
So in addition to having an OSHA log, you also need to have what's called a summary sheet. Now, the OSHA log, you have to have one for each year, and then the summary sheet is going to be based off of the previous calendar year. So for example, it's 2017 now, so I have an OSHA log for any OSHA recordable injuries or illnesses for all of 2017. And then in 2018, I need to fill out this summary sheet. The next presentation is going to show you how to fill out the summary sheet, and it will also go over when to fill out the summary sheet and what you need to do with it.
OSHA Form 300A, Summary of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses. All establishments covered by Part 1904 must complete the Summary of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses, even if no injuries or illnesses occurred during the year. Remember to review the log to verify that the entries are complete and accurate before completing the summary. Using the Form 300, count the individual entries you made for each category. Then write the totals on the left side of the Form 300A, making sure you've added the entries from every page of the log. If you had no cases, write in a 0.
That last part is important because there are oftentimes you might never have a work-related injury, at least not that one that is OSHA recordable. So even though you don't have any, that's wonderful, but you still have to have a log that has 0 injuries or illnesses on it for the year, and then you still also have to have the summary sheet filled out and posted from February 1st to April 30th with zeros on it. Here's one more piece to that summary sheet.
OSHA Form 300A, Summary of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses, continued. On the right side of the Form 300A, fill in the establishment information. Also in this section of the form, a company official must certify that the entries on the summary are true, accurate, and complete. The certifying official must be the owner of the company, an officer of the corporation, the highest ranking company official at the establishment, or that person's supervisor. You must post a copy of the annual summary in each establishment in a conspicuous place or places where notices to employees are customarily posted. You must post it no later than February 1st of the year following the year covered by the records, and keep the posting in place for 3 months until April 30th.
So why is this important? It's important because in order to stay OSHA compliant, we have to follow these regulations. And if anyone from OSHA were to ever walk onto one of your properties, one of the first things that they would ask for are going to be copies of your logs and copies of your summary sheets. Or if it happens to be between February 1st and April 30th, they're going to want to see that summary sheet from the previous year posted on your bulletin board.
Keep the forms on file. You must keep these forms on file for 5 years following the year to which they pertain. You must also update the Form 300 with any changes that may occur to the recorded cases during that period. Do not send completed copies of the form to OSHA. You must make the forms available to employees, former employees, their representatives, and to OSHA officials upon request. Note, however, that both the Log 300 and Form 301 incident reports will include information relating to employee health, and thus can only be used in a manner that protects confidentiality to the extent possible while promoting occupational safety and health. For details concerning the access provisions, refer to sections 1904.35 and 1904.40 using the links on this slide.
So 5 years is the rule of thumb. You should have up to 5 years of OSHA logs and summary sheets. If you are a relatively new property to Morgan, so if you could be a new build, or you could be a property that was recently acquired, less than 5 years ago, then we would just need the number of years and records that would pertain to Morgan management. They wouldn't ask for OSHA records from your previous owner. Okay, so now we're going to switch back over to the presentation one last time. So once again, we're just going to quickly summarize the important key facts of the OSHA record keeping. So recordable injuries or illnesses, again, it's death, loss of consciousness, days away from work, restricted work activity or job transfer, and medical treatment beyond first aid. There are actually a few things I want to add to that. In addition to just doing the record keeping, God forbid we ever had an employee die, that's actually OSHA reportable, not even recordable, but it's actually reportable, meaning we have to pick up the phone and call OSHA pretty much right away and report that. Also, if we ever have an employee like lose a limb or fingers, those are OSHA recordable, and so is any type of injury or illness that results in an overnight stay at the hospital. So if someone is injured badly enough, they go to the emergency room and they end up getting admitted and have to stay overnight, that would be OSHA reportable. So those are things that you definitely, including calling 911 for something like that, calling MedCorps to report it. You also want to make sure you call Human Resources and make sure your regional property manager is aware of what's going on as well, so that we can handle and report these things directly to OSHA when and if it's needed. The summary of work-related injuries that needs to be posted again on your employee bulletin board from February 1st to April 30th. I always try to send out email reminders just before February 1st to remind you to make sure you have your summary sheet, it's filled out, and it's ready to be posted on February 1st. And then I'll also send you an email at the end of April or beginning of May to remind you that you can now take that summary sheet down. You do need to keep your log and summary sheet for 5 years following the year to which they pertain. So in other words, it's now 2017. You should all have a log filled out, even if you haven't had any injuries yet. You should at least have a log ready that has your property's name on it and the year. And then come the end of January, you should have your summary sheet prepared so that it is ready to be posted on February 1st. And again, if you've been with Morgan Management for 5 years, that's great. Make sure you have at least 5 years then of records on file. If you have any records that are older than 5 years, you can get rid of those. We'd actually prefer you got rid of those. And then if you haven't been if your property has not been a Morgan property for 5 years, that's fine. We only need as much years that that's been with Morgan. Okay, moving right along, we're going to briefly talk about employee injury, accident, and investigation. This is relatively a new procedure that we've started to roll out. Historically we've always recorded injuries, and I'm sure we've taken a look at some of these injuries to see why they happened, how they happened, and maybe how we can prevent them from happening further. But we want to take that one step farther and actually start documenting how we're going to prevent these accidents. And we're going to do that by completing an accident investigation form. So again, this is investigating what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and what can be done to prevent it from happening again. It's as simple as asking those W questions. Who did this happen to? Who else was involved? Who saw it happen? Who could have prevented it? What happened? What were they doing wrong? What could have been done differently? Maybe they weren't doing anything wrong at all. Maybe someone was on a ladder and the ladder just broke. That's not necessarily the employee's fault. However, it could be, something that we need to start inspecting our tools and our materials on a regular basis to make sure everything is working properly before our employees are using it. Bottom line is we want to figure out how we can make sure this does not happen again. So included in this presentation, you'll find the employee injury accident investigation form. This is just a screenshot of what it looks like. It is really only one page. It's completely, you can fill it all in on the computer. Tried to make it pretty simple and short. You can just check off some boxes. But the bottom piece is really what we're looking for. We're looking to see, what exactly was the problem and what have you come up with to try to mitigate this from happening again in the future. We also would like to start collecting some witness statements. So if somebody else saw the injury occur, we'd like a statement from them. It's always better to have two sets of eyes, two points of view on these incidences than it is to have just one. So the second page of this form is specifically for the witness to the injury, and it's just just a simple narrative is all we're looking for. On this date at this time, I, John Smith, witnessed Jim Jones fall off a ladder. This is what happened. You're going to want to make sure that the witnesses sign off on these statements and date them. And again, this is not for to penalize anyone or to get anybody in trouble by any means. It is simply for training purposes so that we can understand why some of these things happen and how we can prevent them from happening going forward. All right, last but not least, we are just going to go over some overview levels of information as it pertains to workman's comp. So workman's comp is one of those topics that we don't usually talk about, but it is important to understand how it works, what it means, and what the costs to it are. So from an employer standpoint, workman's comp, it is a statutory and mandatory coverage. As an employer, we have to carry workman's comp insurance. If we didn't, we would receive several penalties and fines from the Workman's Comp Board. It also protects us from being sued by our employees, and it provides us with legal defense if needed. For an employee, it provides them with a tax-free wage reimbursement up to 2/3 of the gross weekly wage capped at a state-determined maximum. The way this works is if an employee is injured and they are taken out of work by a physician, so their doctor says you cannot work because of your injury that happened at work, they will be paid for their lost time for up to 2/3 of their normal weekly wage. Now, this is important to understand. If someone's taken out of work for, let's say, 4 days, the workman's comp insurance is not going to pay for that lost time, okay? They only pay for lost time if it exceeds 7 days. So if someone is injured and they're taken out of work for 9 days, workman's comp will pay for day 7, 8, and 9. And then going back to that, if someone is taken out of work for more than 14 days, workman's comp then goes back to the first day that they lost time. So if I'm taken out of work for 9 days, workers' comp is only going to pay me for the days after day 7. If my doctor takes me out of work for 3 weeks, then workman's comp would pay me for all of the days that I lost from work because 3 weeks exceeds that 14-day cap. We do require any employee that's injured on the job and that loses time from work, we do require that their first week out they use their PTO time if it's available. And that's because we never really know exactly how long someone's going to be out. It's usually they go to the doctors, they get taken out of work for a few days, and they have to go back for a follow-up appointment. And it's really not until that follow-up appointment that we can get a better idea of how long that they'll be out. So to make sure that the employee gets paid, their benefits are paid for, all that sort of stuff, we do require that they use their first week of PTO that they're out. In addition to providing payment for lost time, workman's comp also provides medical care based on the diagnosis related to work injury. So they'll pay for that doctor visit, the hospital visit. They will pay for any prescriptions associated with the injury or illness. They'll also pay for things like physical therapy, ongoing treatment, stuff like that. What is the employer's role versus the employee's role? Well, as an employer, the best thing that we can do, and I'm going to repeat this a lot, is demonstrate caring. If we have an injured employee and they get taken out of work for an extended period of time, the best thing we can do to get them to come back to work and to get them to comply with their doctor's directions is to demonstrate caring. We want to call them. We want to send them a get well card. We want them to make sure they understand how to navigate the workers' comp system, who they need to contact if they have questions. All those kinds of things are very important because it shows the employee that we do care about them. We want them back to work. We hope they get better. And it kind of motivates the employee to do all the things that they need to do so that they can get back to work. proactive communication kind of ties right into that demonstrate caring. We want to be proactive and reach out to the employee, let them know, we're here for them, this is what they need to do, this is their claim number, this is who they need to call, things like that. Also, it goes back to making sure everyone understands things like MedCore and things like accident prevention and investigation. We want all of our employees to know that we have a system, we have procedures, and if they ever are unfortunate enough to become hurt or ill at work, that we have these procedures in place so that they can be treated appropriately and quickly. Recovery at work, what that means is oftentimes employees that are injured, they are given restrictions. Sometimes it can be very difficult to work within those restrictions, but whenever possible, we always, the best thing we can do is to have the employee at work, even if they can't do certain things for a little while. It's always better to have them still be actively coming to work every day and playing some type of role so that they can, stay on track, and it reduces the likelihood that these workers' comp claims will, get dragged out for weeks after weeks or months. The employee's role in all of this, it's their responsibility to report the work-related incidents promptly. They should be reporting them right away. Our goal is to have the injury report and have it reported to the insurance carrier within 24 hours of the injury actually happening. Like I mentioned previously, we don't want our employees to wait 2, 3, 4 days to come and tell you, hey, I was moving something last week and now my back really hurts. Well, they should have came and told you right immediately that while they were moving a refrigerator up the stairs, they felt, a pulled muscle in their back. That should have been reported on day one when it happened. Another piece of their responsibility is to follow up with their regular medical provider visits. If they go to the hospital to have something looked at and the hospital says you need to follow up with your primary care physician over the next week, it's their responsibility to make sure that they do that. They have to keep us, you, anyone that they report to advised of their progress. So if they are taken out of work for a long period of time, a week, 2 weeks, they should be checking in with you periodically to let you know, this is what's going on, here's my doctor's note, I have a follow-up in a few days, I'll check in with you again after that. And that goes right back to complying with doctor's directions as well. So they should not only be following up and going to their doctor's visits, but if their doctor tells them you need to have your leg elevated, for an hour every other hour, they got to make sure they're doing that. They have to follow those restrictions. They can't be lifting things that are over the weight limit of their limits. What's kind of interesting to know is statistically they say that after 12 weeks out of work, employees only have a 50% chance of ever returning to the workforce. So that doesn't mean that they may never return to Morgan Management, but they never may return to work ever again in their whole lives. We don't want that to happen to anyone. So a common question I get is, who's our workman's comp carrier? A lot of times if somebody gets sent to the doctor's office for an injury, the first thing the doctor's office is going to ask is, who's the insurance carrier? The answer to that is going to be PMA Insurance Company. For an exception of Ohio employees, Ohio, you wouldn't be asked that question because Ohio has their own workers' comp program that goes to the Bureau of Workers' Comp in Ohio. And then any Morgan facilities employees, you folks use the insurance carrier by the name of Orex. just something to know that if an employee is injured at work and they're instructed by MedCorps to seek medical attention, they should not be using their own medical insurance. That has happened in the past once or twice, and it's kind of a pain because then we have to remove that claim from their own personal medical insurance and have it moved over to the workman's comp insurance. It wouldn't be uncommon for a medical provider to ask you for like a copy of your insurance card, but you need to make sure that they understand this is a work-related injury and it should not be, the claim should not go on your own personal insurance. And then depending on the severity and treatment, either Morgan Management will pay the medical bill directly or the medical bills will be paid by PMA. What that means is there are certain circumstances and levels in which we don't have to submit claims through the workers' comp insurance. We can just pay for the doctor's bills directly. And the reason we would do that is because the less claims we report to the insurance company, the lower our insurance premium is. Just last year alone, we paid $3 million in workers' comp insurance premiums. That's just the premium. So the less amount of claims that we can have go through the insurance carrier, the less that premium will be. So what is the attorney's role in workers' comp? Well, for us as the employer, it increases our costs because once an employee gets an attorney involved, we have to then get an attorney involved. It creates a longer process. I'm sure all of you at some point in your lives have had to work with an attorney on one thing or another, and you know that they're not the fastest people in the entire world. It just drags out the whole thing. You have to schedule meetings and calls, and then usually there's either mediation involved or things go right directly to court, and then you have to wait for court dates. It just makes everything a much longer, dragged out process. It gives us less control. Once an attorney's involved, we really, our hands are kind of off. We give the attorney, our attorney, all the information that we have regarding the situation, and then it's pretty much up to them to handle it from there. For an employee, the attorneys are influencers. So we've all driven down an expressway and you see the big billboards on the side of the road, call Celino and Barnes, all these attorneys, all the commercials on TV and the radio, they influence employees to think, oh, I got hurt at work, I should call one of these attorneys. Well, it's really not in their best interest to do that because it ends up being lower awards for them, because you all know that if you get an attorney involved and you win your case, you have to then give a percentage of your earnings or award to that attorney. Employees that don't quite understand the language of workers' comp will often seek an attorney because they think it's going to help them navigate the system. But the system's really not that complicated. It basically works very similar to regular insurance. You just have to know your claim number, know who the insurance carrier is, follow up with your doctor, and it should be a smooth process for everyone. If an employee feels like they're being treated unfairly by the employer, they're likely to get an attorney. So that kind of goes back to the demonstrate caring, as does the no employer contact. If we completely disregard an employee that's out on a workers' comp injury, they never hear from us, they have no idea what's going on, they are more likely to contact an attorney. So how do we control these workers' comp claims? Well, the best thing we can do is investigate all the injuries and illnesses. And I said near misses meaning maybe somebody doesn't necessarily get hurt from an accident, but they could have been hurt. So if somebody is on a stepladder painting, the stepladder breaks and they fall, they're okay. They landed on their feet, everything's good, but they could have fallen, they could have landed on their head, they could have a concussion. There could have been a number of things that went wrong in that scenario. That would be called a near miss. So those are still things that we want to investigate so that we can try to prevent from happening in the future. Reviewing our accident and injury data. That means, looking at our trends, seeing what's most common. I can tell you that our most common injuries are from lifting and from things like cuts on people's hands from using various tools, things of that nature. So those are all things that we're looking at and discussing, on a regular basis during our safety committee meetings of what can we do to try to decrease those types of injuries from occurring. We can identify trends by the occupation. It's pretty obvious, I would think, that in our nature, our business, our industry, our maintenance staff has the most exposure to injuries. Location, we can say, hey, do we have more injuries in New York than we do in South Carolina? Is that due to maybe the weather changes that we have, snow, things like that? We often in the wintertime have a lot of slip and fall injuries on ice. Those are all things we can look at to try to prevent the type of injury, cause of injury. As I mentioned, a lot of lifting injuries, cuts, things like that, and body part injured. So that goes back again to, most of the time all of the lacerations and cuts that we see occur on people's hands because from using tools and things like that. Back injuries, of course, for lifting, shoulder injuries, things like that. And last but not least, the best way to control these workers' comp claims is to demonstrate caring. Stay in contact with your injured employee. Find out how they're doing. Make sure you're staying up to date on all their doctor's visits. And also making sure the employee understands what's going on at work. Work with them to see if you can get them back to work on restrictions. Work with their restrictions. We want them to come back. Why is this important? Safety, it affects all of us. We want all of our employees to have a safe place to work, just like we want our residents to have a safe place to live. We want all of you to go home at the end of the day the same way you came in. We don't want anybody to get hurt or sick at work. Work-related injuries are very expensive. Workers' comp claims can cost us tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars in the claims, and then the premiums just go up from there. And it prevents us from doing our jobs effectively. If your maintenance superintendent gets taken out of work for 2 months because he hurt his shoulder and now he has to have surgery, and the surgery requires a long recovery time, well, that's going to negatively affect your property and the rest of your employees from doing their jobs effectively, because now you're down, a pretty key employee there. So just some quick review on everything we've talked about. You're going to call MedCorps, again, for all non-life-threatening injuries. Make sure you educate your employees on the procedure, post the MedCorps stickers, posters, pass out the wallet cards, and put that phone number into your cell phones. OSHA record keeping, again, make sure the forms are in a safe place, make sure everyone knows where to find them, make sure you have 5 years of history if applicable. Again, if your property hasn't been a Morgan property for 5 years, just make sure you have as many years that pertain to you. Just make it a practice to investigate each injury and accident as they occur. Use that accident investigation form to help you. Remember, we're just trying to find out what can we do to prevent this from ever happening again. Most importantly, this is my most important thing that I think you can take away from this, is to demonstrate caring. Injured employers are much more likely to return to work if regular and concerned contact with the employer is maintained. So we want to know what their status is on a regular basis, and also we want to inform them on what's going on and come up with ways that we can get them to come back to work as soon as possible. Again, safety is everyone's responsibility. Employee and resident safety should be top priority. We want everyone to go home the same way they came in. Workman's comp injuries cost the company time and money. Please, if you have any questions about this presentation, I apologize. I know it's a little long. There's a lot of information crammed into a short period of time. Use those materials that are attached to the presentation, but please feel free to reach out to me. You can call me. My direct line is 585-264-2229, or please feel free to email me. It's amysansone@morgancommunities.com. And I hope you all learned important information from this.